Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 1185th New Social Environment. I'm Chloe Stagaman, Director of Programs here at the Rail, and I have the extreme privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Christine Sun Kim and Christina Yang. And now I'll introduce today's guest and host. Christine Sun Kim is an American artist based in Berlin. Kim's practice considers how sound operates in society, deconstructing the politics of sound, and exploring how oral languages operate as social currency. Musical notation, written language, infographics, American Sign Language, the use of the body, and strategically deployed humor are all recurring elements in her practice. Working across drawing, performance, video, and large-scale murals, Kim explores her relationship to spoken and signed languages, to her built and social environments, and to the world at large. Kim's work has been extensively exhibited and performed internationally. She is represented by François Ghebaly Gallery and Whitespace. And our host today, Christina Yang, is an independent curator, writer, and scholar based in New York and Williamstown. She specializes in spectatorship, the politics of the image, experimental genres, and feminist care. She has been a curator at the Kitchen, the Queen's Museum, the Guggenheim Museum, as well as at Williams College and UC Berkeley. She teaches in SVA's master's program in curatorial practice, and she is currently participating in Asia Art Archive in America's 2024 Leadership Camp. She recently defended her PhD dissertation in performance studies at NYU, titled Bodies in the Dark, Dance and Camera Performance in the Kitchen Archive from 1974 to 84. And with that, I am going to pass it over to Christina to get us started, with gratitude to Christine, Christina, and the team at the Whitney for making this possible.
Thank you so much, Chloe, Magali, Min, Fong, Charlie, and the entire Brooklyn Rail team for inviting me to be your host today and for always holding us in such welcoming arms. We could take the first slide, Chloe. And of course, the biggest congratulations to our featured artist today, Christine Sun Kim, and to the curators and staff at the Whitney Museum, where this exhibition has been on view for about a month, and to the Walker Art Center, which will receive the show, I think, later this year or early next year. This is an extraordinary exhibition. I also want to give very special hello, I hope he's here, and welcome and thank you to, and congratulations to the guest curator, Tom Finkelpearl. Tom shared this concept of this exhibition with me while the project was still in its development, and I'm so excited to see its realization. As Chloe mentioned, I'm a former curator also at the Queen's Museum and Williams College, where there were two very exciting acquisitions and large-scale public installations in 2022 and 23. Lastly, I'm actually also a longtime colleague of Catherine Potts, who was the director of education at the Whitney Museum and the educator who invited Christine to start the Whitney Science program. So I feel very lucky to be woven into the web of Christine's community and to be here with her today. And also a special thanks to and welcome to her two interpreters, Beth. Well, I can't say her last name, I'm sorry. It's Beth. We just know her as Beth. And her title, her name is ASL interpreter, and behind the scenes I'm sorry, Beth is behind the scenes. Denise is right there with you, with us on screen. Okay, let's go to the next slide and hear from Christine. We're gonna ask some questions. So this exhibition takes place on the occasion of a nearly 15-year body of work. The Whitney Museum exhibition is felt throughout almost the entire museum, across the 8th floor, the 3rd floor, on the 1st floor, and in the lower level. It's accompanied by a robust series of public engagements in the form of ASL tours, object descriptions, vlogs, family programs, and more. And we'll extract some insights from the excellent catalog as well, and really, most importantly, hear from Christine herself. So one of the ways I like to organize these programs with artists and curators is to do a sort of walkthrough of the exhibition to sort of provide the viewers with an as if you were there experience, We'll make a couple stops along highlights and bodies of work, and then we'll, of course, invite Christine to speak to them, and then we'll hear from you. And we have, I think, a very special closing this morning. So let's see, maybe, oh no, let's keep it here for a second. So even before a visitor enters the exhibition, one of the things I'd like to ask Christine to speak about is this incredible immersion and wrapping that takes place on the museum walls. We'll look at the next slide, Chloe. So here's a close-up of the sort of like almost like screen-like greeting that the viewer or visitor receives. And I'd really like you to pay attention not just to the sort of flow of lines, but also, especially in this middle section of this wall to your right, the smudging and the marks and the sensation of, well, so many things, the body, of nature, of more things. I mean, there's really a kind of like shimmer, or, a kind of like hesitation that is so evocative. So Christine, maybe we could have you speak to sort of the introduction of the show, the sort of, was this an exhibition design decision? Do you see this, I mean, this is an artwork, right? This is sort of an artwork that you position within different institutions, but would love to hear you speak about the conceptual of this and some of the materiality of it.
Well, good morning. Hi, everyone. It's good to see you all again. I know you could turn off your audio. One second. Okay, and then because then to hear the response. Okay, sorry, but go ahead and.
Can I ask the question again? Would that help?
Yes, now we can hear you. Perfect. Okay, so I heard the question. I've got it. We're all set up so I can respond by acknowledging first and foremost, this was entirely a team effort. The Whitney team was one of the best teams I've ever worked with. The curator, Jenny, from the Whitney, and then the other two co-curators, Pavel and Tom, were able to get this exhibition together. And then the Whitney's exhibition design, being able to get the catalog and everything. I just see this as a big group effort. So for something I can talk a little bit more later in this morning's program, but is the idea of echo and how that to me, despite being a sound term, captures deafness and the deaf experience so well. So that kind of became this overarching theme in the process of developing this exhibition. And so we talked about that as a team, because I said how I wanted echo and repetition to have a presence in the exhibition design. And so the team here managed to achieve that with the wall designs up on the 8th floor, the way there are L-shaped walls that repeat themselves. Additionally, like you said, with this immersion and this wrapping experience of the 8th and the 3rd floor, I didn't want the title walls to interrupt that immersion experience. And I didn't want my mural to be interrupted with a title wall. So I had a proposed idea of setting the title wall back into the middle of the exhibition space, so to speak. And that got approved. And what I love is that when you get off the elevator, you see my work first, and then you have to walk into the space, put forth a little bit of labor, and find out the information that you're looking for from the title wall. When it comes to my mural, I work with a muralist, a painter who is British but lives in Berlin. His name is Jake Kent. And we started working together. I mean, I can't remember specifically what year, years ago. And we started working together. He wasn't the only painter that I worked with initially, but I discovered that he really knows exactly what I want. He understands my work the best. And in fact, he has enough autonomy from our relationship that he can make decisions without having to confirm those decisions with me every time. So he came up with like this dry brushiness technique. Basically, it's that you've run out of paint on the brush and still continue to paint, which gives my murals that maybe absence of sharp edges and instead gives my mural better senses of the charcoal that you find in my drawings. And so what's happening when Jake is painting my murals on site is that he's echoing my work. So that's another way in which the theme comes up. And just so you know, I could talk an hour about that mural, so I'll stop there and kind of see how you want me to calibrate.
Fear not, we will return to many of those things, Christine. We'll return to collaboration, we will return to the body, and we'll return to echo. So thank you so much for providing us with that beautiful behind the scenes kind of like thinking. So let's stay here for a minute, Chloe. So we are approaching the entrance to the exhibition. As Christine mentioned, you can actually see peek-throughs of additional works, even as you are getting past the mural and come into the some of the, like, let's say, the didactic spaces. But the reason why I wanted to show this piece in this view is because I thought we could ask Christine to speak about the title of the exhibition. So Christine Sung Kim, All Day, All Night, refers to two bodies of work, an early work. Maybe we'll go to the next slide, Chloe. And then to the earlier, to the first slide you just saw with a more of a shaped canvas. The early drawings are from about 2012. The shaped canvases are more recent, from 2023. So in the catalog introduction, the curators offers that the titles, I'm going to paraphrase here a little bit, is that ASL is the connective tissue that communicates the joy of deaf folks chatting all day and all night. But I thought we could ask Christine directly, what the title signifies for her, because since it's a theme that she's gone back to, even in a decade of work. So, and then Christine, I don't know if you also are able to speak to maybe the handwritten text in these drawings in particular, but really very an open question about the title and then these two works, which, kind of rose to the occasion of being the exhibition title.
So let me show how everyone here how to sign all day and all night in American Sign Language. If you see my arm here, that is the horizon. And as we all know, the sun rises, crosses the sky, and sets. So here is all day, all night. Now, this is the sign for one day. This is the sign for 2 days. When you have the full palm, it shows the wholeness of a full day. And so this is the American sign for all day. And then this is the American sign for all night. So it's representing the movement of the sun around the horizon line. And so for me, when I think about all day, you can create your own sense of time. You could have a very quick day where you kind of blink and missed the entire day. Where did it go? Or the day can go by really slowly and then go by quickly at night. There are ways in just the movement of the sun hand, if you will, that you can create your timeline of the day. And then you also use your facial expressions to modify and add texture to the day that you're having. So this is a day. This is a long day. This is a very exhausting day. You can do that for all night as well. And if you see the black text or the black line drawing, that shows all day, and the red line drawing is all night. I like being able to have a line drawing that outlines all day and all night, but all night seems cuter. I don't know, it's like picking your favorite child, but either way. You can also see I have arrowheads on the line drawings. And like you asked, Christina, there is some text. And then also color, which is something I don't use anymore. Maybe I'll reintroduce color into my practice, but these drawings come from my last summer at Bard when I was getting my MFA in sound. And so I had been going through this process. I had been working a lot with marker to kind of identify my practice and my vocabulary, which maybe if you've seen Feedback Aftermath, that series of drawings, which is also in the exhibition, also uses marker, which I don't use any longer, but I've also seen now revisiting these pieces that it fades over time. And what an interesting word, marker. But I also found it to be too clean and leaving my mark. I, with my beingness, I'm very complex, I'm very messy. My beingness can be hostile. My beingness can be forgetful, ambiguous, hard to capture. And for all of those reasons, charcoal and dry pastel really suits my practice, marker less so. And what I realized is that there is a politics behind leaving traces of you. And if you leave a messy enough mark, you can never really fully erase it, which is what I get with charcoal. So that's why I like it. There's the politics of adding to my own, I don't know, little deaf and Korean American history that I can leave and add to many histories from all over the world and from all different kinds of people.
Thank you so, so much, Christine, for that evocative answer. Chloe, if we could actually go to the next slide. We're going to walk actually into the exhibition now, or, we're already in the show, but continue to walk through the exhibition. So I do like to take a somewhat chronological approach when I follow exhibitions, at least the first time I visit. So as Christine mentioned, the All Day, All Night series started not long after she completed her MFA at Bard, in the 2013, 2012 years. And this first gallery includes some of the early works that she, constructed. Can we, let's see, maybe go to the next slide? Yeah. So, Christine, I would love to hear you talk about your disciplinary identification as a sound artist. In your catalog interview, you speak about mentors like John Cage or Pauline Oliveris and Namjoon Pike. And I would love to hear you talk about maybe your use of musical notation and how these notes and texts and visual codes, like how are they working for you artistically and politically?
So when I started to see sound as a medium and started thinking about sound as a medium and making that leap into that medium, I would say that was probably one of the scariest moments of my entire life because I couldn't help but wonder to myself, like, what the fuck am I doing? I know nothing about sound. But the truth is that I did know a lot. I just didn't know it in maybe the universal way. Maybe I had it in the way that one experiences an inferiority complex where you feel like you're not good enough to engage with something because you're not part of it or you're not engaging with it in the way that people say you should, which is what like an inferiority complex is. I feel like a lot of times people talk about sound regardless of whether they hear or don't hear because it's been such a hearing thing. And so we talk about it as if it's a hearing thing. I feel colonized by sound. And so I had to decolonize myself from sound, from the way hearing people see sound. And so, of course, as I was going through this journey, it made sense to engage with some of the bigger names like John Cage. For me, John Cage basically broke every single classical rule or tradition around music and didn't feel bad about it. Right. He was like, look, you can notate whatever you want. He was somebody who was saying you could notate silence. He was somebody who was saying you could notate chairs. And engaging with that practice helped me better understand what was possible, realizing that I could also go in my own direction. I could also do what I want. I didn't realize that for most of my life until that point. Of course, John Cage wrote about other topics that I don't find as relatable, which is the same thing with Paulina Oliveros. Like some of that is really hard for me to relate to, but obviously these are fantastic people to have inspiration by. Pauline was actually one of my teachers at Bard, and I felt really fortunate because she did spend a lot more time with me than some of the other students and wanted to help me and wanted to give me resources and materials that I needed. She gave me space to talk about sound with her. We had discussions. I felt like my relationship with her was so much different, was so much was different so much more so than with other teachers, and I felt like I had the opportunity to engage with her, like when she was teaching at her classes, she invited me in. And that was similar to the experience that I had with another teacher of mine, Larry Polanski, who recently actually just passed away last year. the same with Pauline actually a few years ago, but Larry actually knew sign language. That was so special for me to be able to have an instructor who I could communicate to in sign language without an interpreter. I visited him at Dartmouth. I was able to go to UC Santa Cruz and visit him there. To me, Pauline and Larry were two people who really spent a lot of time, who sat down with me, who also tried to understand where I was coming from in the discussions we had around sound. Their actions and their dedication of their time to me had that warm welcome that I needed into the sound world. I mean, I'm sure if you've seen my Deaf Rage drawing series, I did not have the best experience at Bard. Quite frankly, most of the students in my program were quite ableist and didn't, it was offensive for them to have a deaf person in the sound program. And so, which is what ableism is in that context. And so it forced me to think about, why was I receiving this kind of treatment? Or why does sound have to be this way, where not everybody is welcome? When it comes to notating, that was a process for me that became politicized. Part of it's that I was just struggling to find my footing and struggling to find out where I belonged in my sound program, in the world of sound in general, and then also the art world. So finding notation was my way of figuring out my path forward and how I wanted to move in these spaces. I could make my mark. And the further I went in these spaces, the more I saw what I could do. And it felt like notating came with a lot of mentoring for me. And I think I wasn't conscious that I was getting these kind of mentoring experiences from Pauline and Larry in the moment, but I very much see it now.
Thank you so much, Christine. That was amazing to hear about your studies and your leap into being a sound artist, which, I mean, we continue to learn things from as about sound from you. So I would love to ask actually about your use of lettering, the block letters, and handwriting in your practice. Chloe, could we go one slide back, maybe? So here we have sort of like at least three visual motifs working here. Your use of the score, your use of musical notation, uh, the blurring and the smudging. But I also love in a way, your hail to the audience, the way in which you're directly talking to us. And again, rather than having a straight sentence, you actually have a cross out. So it's almost like we're in two phases of two mental spaces at least. So I'm wondering if you could talk about then, I mean, actually whatever you want to talk about in terms of this work, but really, adding a sort of layer, it's almost like you're being our conscience. You're being our conscience through language, while presenting this visual notation as another expanded way in which to speak to your viewer. So maybe that's the question, is like, how do you wish to engage the viewer in these like multiple levels of consciousness and reading?
You said something to the effect of being very like direct or honest with the audience. And I have to admit that I never felt like I've had the privilege in life to be ambivalent, to be ambiguous, to be able to kind of be removed. The meme that's like that one person standing in the corner, like they don't know, insert whatever concept here. I felt like that. Like I feel like I can't be a little bit vague, because if I'm a little bit vague, even then people will just dismiss my work as hard to understand, or maybe too specific to a certain experience that I inhabit. So for those reasons, I can't meet my audience halfway. I feel like I have to go beyond halfway. And I also feel like in doing that, I have to be as clear as possible. I have to say, I would love to get to a point where I could just say whatever I want, like talk about nothing. I want to get to that kind of privilege platform where I can just faff. But I think I also come from the experience of working with interpreters always growing up, which means that if I was not clear to the interpreters, meaning that they couldn't understand me, then nobody understood me, and then I was not clear to all, and then that had negative impacts on how the communication proceeded after that fact. So part of it's like I have to be clear because it's connected to my basic rights. But I also have to be clear because if you're, as a person, not clear enough, that impacts your access to your rights. So I'm coming from that place of fear, and that's from how I grew up in the life that I've had, worrying about in communicating with people who don't sign, how do I make myself clear enough for them? I mean, I don't worry about it all the time, but it comes to mind when I'm working through pieces and I'm in the process of creating, or sometimes I ask myself afterwards if this piece is clear enough, which is why you see text as much as you do. I feel like it is a good compromise to meet my audiences halfway. Actually, TBD, TBC, TBA is one of my favorite drawings because sound is full of anticipation, expectation. That's what I experience with my interpreters too. Like as soon as my interpreter sits in front of me in class growing up, the teacher, then I had access to what the teacher was saying. And if it was pop quiz today, then I would only find that out with that anticipation for waiting for the interpreter to put their hands up.
Well, that's actually a perfect introduction to the next series I'd love to talk about. Chloe, let's go to slide 13, actually. So I wanted to maybe have Christine, since we were talking about time and talking about delay and anticipation, like sort of riffing off of TBC, TBD, TBA. This is a shot of Christine's future-based series. So maybe a couple years out of grad school from 2016. Maybe the next slide, Chloe. I mean, it's a blurry, slightly close-up of some of these works. Christine, the incredible essay by Seth Kim Cohen in the catalog talks about the concept of latency, and specifically about this future series and the debt series. So we have a couple slides here of both those bodies of work. And I guess we would love, yeah, this is a perfect slide, to love to hear you talk about, your experience in thinking about time and thinking about debt and thinking about time as a social obligation, but particularly for the deaf community. And so, we're always working, with this delay with your interpreters or not, or, stuck somewhere between known and unknown. But anyway, would love to hear about you talk about time and the future and Seth's essay, and really what you wanted to accomplish with we have the future series here, and then I have a slide of the debt series coming up next. Maybe time and debt, I guess, would be great to hear your thoughts on.
Do you mean future-based related to time and debt? Can I repeat those concepts? Sorry, I think, Christina, I'm having a moment. Can you just explain that question again?
Oh, sure, sure. So I'm thinking about Seth's essay, and where he talks about time and the notion of latency, and how, like, for example, the experience of ASL is one where you're waiting for, you know, for something, for a sound. He then extracts that idea into thinking about the future series and debt in particular, and how certain forms of debt, are about delayed payment back, paying back. So I realize it's a sort of triangulation
No,
of.
with you. That helped me. Maybe I just needed to see it again, basically. Okay. When it comes to future, to me, future is setting oneself up to expect to receive something, but that thing might not always come, it might not always arrive. And so you might spend a period of time waiting, and then it arrives, it feels different versus those who receive things in real time, such as information. And that connects to debt. Like I am owed the information, but I might get more or less of it. And if I get less, then I'm in information debt in a sense. This also is a commentary on access to resources, which is a conversation I've been having a lot with my friends recently. I have some friends who are children of deaf adults, meaning that they were born hearing into a deaf household. We call them codas. And I've finally started to see through talking to them that the generation before me of deaf people, who are people that I've met before, who said that they maybe went to they might have gone to art school at Parsons, at Pratt, at SAIC, but they did this schooling without interpreters. So these are deaf people who are older than me before having access to interpreters, went to art school, but had to kind of survive art school through lip reading and maybe not being able to engage as fully as I was able to. So the idea is that there is a generation of deaf people who went to art school without access and kind of made it work. But what does that mean for your future? Does that mean you're only kind of getting 10% of the future that you should have gotten or that would have been promised to you as your hearing peers going to art school? Now I'm in my generation, and a lot of us in my generation have been able to pursue higher education, like getting PhDs in physics and different sciences, deaf doctors. There are a bunch of deaf lawyers now. So it feels like the future that we are being owed is catching up to us. And so it does feel like for a while there was less debt around the future that we were owed. But with the way the political climate is now, it feels like our access to accommodations and resources is being taken away again. And so then I'm wondering what kind of future we're going to be owed. And then I wonder, with the education, the state of education being what it is and might become, will we be smart enough to navigate the world? Other people don't have to navigate the world in the way that we do. And so I can't help but wonder now around this series of drawings around debt. I'm going to show you the sign in American Sign Language for debt and owe, which is very similar to what one would probably use when gesturing or body language to communicate, like pay up, oh, you owe me. We've seen this in films, but this is the American Sign for it as well. Like I'm waiting for that money to be put in my palm, but you modify the sign in your with your facial expressions. So how severe is the debt? How much does this person owe you, or how long is this person owed you? Or is it in fact affordable with a positive facial expression?
Yeah.
Now, with these drawings, they came to be because of the experiences that I was having as an American who moved to Berlin and how affordable Berlin was for me. There's actually a meme online that says, "How do you hold your cigarette?" And essentially, how you hold your cigarette determines what kind of famous philosopher you are, whether you're like Descartes or whoever. And so I then take this idea of debt, and in American Sign, the way you move your palm indicates who is in debt to who, basically who owes who what. So this is you owe me, right? You've got to pay me. And so I moved around the hand shapes to indicate different types of debt. But this debt also to me means that you don't get the full future that you're promised, you're owed. And so these are my list of demands of what America owes us deaf people, which would be like guaranteed fast Wi-Fi on planes at all times so that I can video chat with anyone I want whenever I want. That would be my number one debt that I want paid back.
Thank you so much, Christine, for that answer that about intersecting, intersecting social situations that you're owed. Listen, let's go to the next slide, Chloe. So again, a further articulation of the multiple identities or realities that you live between. You mentioned that in your response to Jenny Goldstein's question from the catalog, that you're not a fan of code switching, although it has been a lifelong tool. And you say that I think sometimes it's about how you adjust yourself. So code switch yourself without compromising your identity. So I wonder if you could speak a little bit about those multiple identities that you hold and in which ways that maybe comes out in your work or that you want to communicate. Um, Again, not a singular identity or a single your point of view, but sort of multiple perspectives.
Mhm. This is a good drawing to have while talking about this, English versus deaf English. Let me form my response. I guess I'm thinking about a lot of things. So there's one idea that I'm engaging with when I work, and that's like I always need to choose a medium, and then from there I can apply my work in response to that medium. And typically what I find is that one piece or one work is not enough. I'm sure you've noticed most of my work comes in sets or series. So my Deaf Rage series is a set of 6 drawings. I'm not even sure how many drawings are in future based. Actually, I've got Jenny here right with me. Do we know how many drawings are in the future based series? She's saying 20. 20, see? Jenny's the lady with the numbers. So future base is 20 drawings. This means I have 20 answers to the question of future. And part of that is because I don't come from one place, one identity. I have many multiple identities. And so my answer doesn't allow me to always come to answer from one identity. I have to kind of have my answer from multiple identities. And so I want to give all of those identities a chance to answer. With this series, I think I have a set of 4 drawings. So 4 drawings is one set in the series. And I feel like I have to over explain and I have to keep explaining, which comes from the experience of having so many identities in my being. Also, the experience of being an immigrant is also very different for me because I'm now an immigrant in Germany. I'm navigating what's happening over there. What I'm seeing is that right-wing extremists is coming to the forefront in Germany and they're anti-immigrant, but then I look back on where I come from and my parents are immigrants in the US, and so I was raised by immigrants. My kids are not currently immigrants, but if they move to the US where I grew up, they will then be immigrants. These are things that I think about, and I can never just answer it in one way, in one form.
I love, Christine, how your answers actually anticipate the next question. So let's take a look at the Death Rage series. So as Christine anticipated, the sort of next sequence of works in the exhibition are much larger scale drawings. So between these next series, which maybe reflect a bigger studio and the move to Berlin, or just thinking about scale, I think is really interesting. But in thinking about the different Deaf Rage works, Christine, I'm wondering if you could talk about your engagement with institutions. And so whether it's, museums, whether it's the, healthcare, whether it's art schools, the Deaf Rage series seems directed towards, your interface and, geopolitical bureaucratic systems or immigration, as you mentioned, or even being a woman and from the Asian diaspora. So I think, Chloe, we can scroll through the next couple slides, but maybe we'll stick with Deaf Rage for an instant to sort of like um, hear from Christine about. I mean, so what I'm fascinated here about not just the narrative, with the text, but also how you present different scales. This is in a way I'd love to hear how this work relates to the pie chart series, which we'll see next. So this use of mathematical formulas as a way to quantify rage, or as just really kind of like both incredibly analytical but incredibly emotional at the same time. So would love to hear you speak about this series, the range of large drawings that are in the exhibition, which we'll see through pictures shortly.
First of all, you're right. When I moved to Berlin, that was kind of the first time that I could have my own studio space. Mind you, it's not that very it wasn't that big compared to a lot of other artists that I know, but that's kind of the nice thing about paper is that you can stack paper on top of each other by just taping them on the wall, which is so easy to do in a small space. Had I been a sculptor or had I been a sculptor, that would have been much more harder with the sculptures that I make. But with paper, it's kind of like I create the piece, I'm done with it. I can just tape it on the wall and then I can tape them on top of each other. It's quite nice. But also, like you asked, I do use infographics a lot in my practice. And part of that is because of what I see on social media. I also studied graphic design for a year while I was an undergrad. And all of those experiences have helped me understand the power of composition. Also helped me understand how just a few words can really transmit the entire idea and transmit this idea and this concept beyond just the art world. I love text in art, especially Ed Ruscha. Ruscha is really talented at being able to have text without computers, right? Like he makes this kind of text with his hands, and that's very interesting to me and very visually impressive. I can see that he knows how to deconstruct just one letter. So one of my favorite pieces of his is if italicized, right? So seeing how he uses scale and color is very exciting to me. He's one of those text artists that I really do look up to. And I think with coming from a graphic design perspective, I can then add to the questions that I have around how do I express my ideas? How do I express my deafness? And doing it in a way that I can contain it all in infographics. Infographics are just basically full of lines and shapes. That's all they are. But with that, there are so many people, regardless of regardless of where they come from or what language they speak, will be able to understand it. Like you mentioned, pie charts, it's an easy way to indicate how to break up an amount of something. People understand getting a big slice of something versus a small slice of something. Now, when it comes to my Deaf Rage series, I chose angles because I felt like in the angles and the degrees, that was a good way to convey amount and quantity. And each angle has its own like proper noun of it. And then I could play with those terms. Oh, hi, thank you. Yes. So it's like the idea of acute, that is a word that I can play with. Right angle, which I could play with the idea of right turning into legit, being very like being validated in these feelings that I had was also fun for that series. And so the 6 pieces of rage that I have, 5 come from my general experiences, the deaf community's general experiences, friends and family's contributions to sharing their life stories. But the last one, the 6th one, is explicitly my deaf rage in the art world. So I am thinking about specific people in that drawing, specific places and specific times. And yeah, they still have my rage. I still have rage. Artists have rage.
We feel it. We feel it. So thank you. Thank you for those for making the work and for your articulation of how you constructed them. Chloe, let's gently go through after trauma. Yeah, let's go to over and over. Christine, do you want to speak about this work? Yeah, I see you nodding, and then we'll go down to the 3rd floor.
Nice. So this piece is about obsessing because I obsess about a lot of things. Some things I obsess over for a long, long period of time. Some things I just obsess over really shortly. So here's the sign for obsession. First, I'm going to point to my mind, which is why you see RH right hand, LH left hand. And so my dominant hand is my right hand. And so you can do it that way, or some labeling for pieces is dominant hand, non-dominant hand for when the linguistics of signs are being written in different books and publications. But I, as the artist, prefer to say right hand, left hand. But so the sign for obsession is taking what is on your mind and transferring it to your hands. So whatever is in your mind is on your hands. So you have mind, touch, and then the touch percolates, becomes cyclical, is the obsession, because what you're doing, what you're thinking about becomes this thing, it becomes tangible, it becomes physical as obsessions do. So it depends on how long you obsess on something. The longer you obsess, I suppose, the more physical it becomes. But this is a sign for obsession. Mind touch, mind touch, mind touch. And that's what you see in the drawing here.
One of these days, Christine, we'll talk about games. Oh, go ahead.
Well, sorry, yeah, I just want to add, you can also see the perforated lines at the bottom, if you will. Oh yeah. It's because in those moments, the dot, 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 if you will, is that they haven't quite made the connection. Yeah, I have my own version. But so where you see the solid lines, that's where the touch has been made, and the broken up lines, the dotted lines, are where that connection hasn't quite been made yet.
I could talk to you, Christine, about touch all day long. I'm very, very interested in the haptics of seeing, and that seeing is a form of touch. So you've encapsulated that, so beautifully here. Well, we have some time still, but I want to make sure we go to the other floors of the exhibition. So Chloe, if we could go to the third floor. Okay. So Christine, you mentioned earlier your interest in this notion of echo, and the echo series is very much all-encompassing and on view here on the third floor. And you see both a wall work and a work on paper layered on top of each other. So they're in a way echoing each other for the viewer visually. Chloe, maybe the next two slides also, a little close-up of the, I think this is called long echo, is that correct? And yeah, a close-up. So could you speak a little bit more about this series and what entices you about the echo as beyond everywhere around us? But also, I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit more about when you've shown your work in different countries, like what has been a response of different viewers, and how have things echoed in different ways, in different contexts? And I mean, I'll also mention that we're not going to spend so much time today because it's not featured in the exhibition, but you also frequently work in very large scale in public space. So outside of museums, outside of galleries. And I'm wondering if you could speak to your interest in having this platform and having a voice in the general public sphere.
You got it. Yeah. So to respond to the third floor, I'm going to start off by showing you the sign for echo. And you'll have one hand represent the wall or the surface for the sign, and then you have my RH, my right hand, being the hand that moves to represent sound. So this is sound moving through air, hitting a surface and bouncing off, which is what an echo is. So this is the sign in American Sign Language for echo. And deaf life is full of echoes. Beth is actually echoing what I'm saying right now. Denise is echoing what you're saying. And all of this built up to the deaf experience. When I was in school, all of my lectures were echoed through an interpreter or a note taker. I watched film and TVs being echoed through subtitles and captions. And so I've thought about this echo, and I realized that echoes can be quite thin, which means I barely got the information, or echoes can be really thick, which means I got, I don't know, 90% of the information. And there was almost equivalency there. But so then I became obsessed about echoes. And I was thinking about what if I shifted the perspective on the sign for echo, which is what you see in the drawing of long echo. You see the movement of the echo. And then the mural, which is prolonged echo on the third floor, speaks to the experience of an echo trap, right? I've got you stuck in this space with the echo repeating from wall to wall to wall, which is a commentary on when an idea or a concept gets stuck in society amongst people, right? It's this idea that persists, that never changes, and this could be because it's forever trapped. So that's a commentary on society and the deaf community because we're all guilty of this. The deaf community is very small and can't help but have a love-hate relationship with the deaf community, which is the same love-hate relationship that I have with society writ large. Like, who doesn't? Society is not perfect. And so this has to do with the idea of ideas being trapped. And I got to this point because Jenny Goldstein, the curator at the Whitney here, and I'm asking her to show a piece from 2018, which is a drawing that came from my Future Base series, but that we then turned it into a billboard for the High Line that starts at the Whitney. And when Jenny proposed this concept to me of doing the billboard, I always felt like, well, my works have only ever been on paper. And I'm sure you can hear the paper being leafed through here. But my work had all, oh, look at that. So my work had only ever been on paper. I had never scaled up to the size of something like a billboard. But I chose this drawing because I just had my first baby and this was kind of where my bandwidth landed. So I gave it to Jenny and she scaled it up to the size of a billboard and it worked. So I realized at that point what would be possible for me moving forward. And I got a lot of requests to do billboards. Like I worked with For Freedoms to do billboards throughout the US. And so I got to that size. And then I got asked to do murals because people had seen billboards. And that's when I started working with Jake Kent, my painter. And then I realized I could do this. I could do things at scale. And admittedly, I've never looked back since. So thanks to Jenny.
Thank you so much. I love how that connects, the echoes to billboards to actually our next topic. So, Chloe, if we could go to the next slide. So we're now going to go downstairs to the first floor and then to the lower level. And we're going, I'd love to hear Christine speak about, well, I'm going to introduce like 3 intertwined genres that she is currently working in: collaboration, family, and performance. But since you introduced one of your muralist collaborator, Christine, could you talk about this work that's also with a composer and an animator, if I'm correct, and maybe talk about your interest in returning to work with certain people in your life, artistically and personally.
So many people. In some drawings, in some series, I like a trilogy, if you will. It's kind of like I work in threes. And it's because I'm commenting on a family level, a society level, and so family level, community level, and then society level. Like I'm scaling up and out.
Mhm.
So my husband, Tom, who's also my partner and somebody who I have a duo practice with. So he kind of started on his own solo practice working with an animator who then I got introduced to. So basically, this animator became the family animator, and we started working together. The animator would work with just Tom, just me, with both of us as a duo. Now, here at the Whitney, we'd adapted a piece of mine called A String of Echo Traps. Here in the Whitney, it's 3 cubes that are hung by wires through the stairwell that goes from the first floor to the 3rd floor. And initially, the original composition of this piece was 2 screens cornering each other with 2 projectors projecting onto the screens. I worked with this animator, and then once the piece was completed, I then reached out to a friend of mine who is a musician to create the soundscape for this piece and adapt to the work, not having the work adapt to the sound. And so it was important for me to have the concept be in place with the animator and then sound to be thought of as an afterthought. So what I did is, based on the piece, I created some parameters. I gave the parameters or / instructions to the musician to then make sound in response to the piece. So again, like I said, this is two screens being cornered and having projection on these screens. And Jenny asked me to essentially invert this idea and cube it. But what I realized about the shape of the cube is that it better traps the string of echo traps. And so this was entirely Jenny's idea. So she had adapted it from the original iteration into cubes, and it worked. It came out really beautifully. So thanks, Jenny.
So let's stay on this train of collaborative work, and let's turn to your work maybe with a very special collaborator. You mentioned your husband, Thomas Mader. This, I believe, is one of your collaborators. And so what's so interesting about this piece is that it's not a drawing, and it's not a video, but a sculptural work that expands and contracts. So would you want to speak about sort of your collaborative work with Thomas? And we did have a view of an earlier performance as well, but whichever one you want to talk about, or however you want to talk about, collaboration and making new work.
So like talk a little bit more about how I collaborate with Tom.
Yeah.
Great. So when Tom and I met, he was living in Berlin, I was living in New York. And we did just this small, cute project, which I didn't take very seriously. And our pace was kind of like we would do one piece a year together, depending on my mood. But then time passed, and I was a few years into my career, and we were having our work in my exhibitions. So then people were looking at our work as my work because they were in my solo exhibitions. And then we were in a group show where we showed our work, and the labeling of our piece was by Christine Sun Kim, and then in parentheses, and Thomas Mader. And to me, that kind of felt like a slap in the face moment where it became clear to me, at least, that I wanted to separate my solo practice from our duo practice because Tom is also an artist. He has his own solo practice. And so I wanted to make sure that we could better clarify our duo practice and the pieces that we make as a duo from my solo practice. And we actually might even have a trio practice if you consider some of the pieces that Tom and I have done with our daughter, Rue.
We go to the next slide, Chloe.
To be fair, Rue has told us that she wants to be a zookeeper. She doesn't want to be an artist. So I wouldn't expect this trio practice to emerge. She has been steadfast in her desire to be a zookeeper for years now and wants to just feed animals for a living. But I also think zookeepers can be artists, whatever. Coming back to Tom and I's duo practice, we've created pieces, and it's been intense because while we are partners, husband and wife, we are also parents, we are family members, and then we also are artists who have a duo practice together, and we've figured out communication. And now we're at the point where we're having another duo practice at the Welcome Collection in London with basically an entirely new body of works, except for one or two pieces. So for this image here from 2018, which is a week's worth of lullabies for Rue, which is a year after Rue was born, she is now 7 years old. This came to be because we were preparing for our baby to be born. We'd gotten a wireless Bluetooth baby monitor where one is for the parents and you can kind of watch the baby from it. And then one monitor stayed in the baby's room. But because it's wireless, if you as a parent went out of range, the baby monitor would light red, which is what you see at one end of this piece. And then when you could bring the monitor back into range, it would go purple. And that's how, as a parent, you knew that the baby monitor was back in range. So I decided for this piece to basically make a pill box a week's worth and use the coloring of red to purple, basically indicating in range and out of range, or taking the inspiration from that at least. Now, the baby monitor that I had also had pre-filled lullabies so that if I was notified on the baby monitor that my baby was crying, I could then just push a button and a lullaby would play in her room and supposedly soothe her back to sleep. But look, I wasn't actually comfortable with that idea. I also wasn't interested in the lullabies that were already on the monitor. And so what I decided to do is enlist 7 contributors for this piece who were also parents themselves. I had a list of parameters for the soundtracks that I wanted them to create the lullabies. And so there had to be no words, low frequency, and you can see the audio descriptions that I also asked each contributor to write about the piece they created. All of these are available online. If you listen to these tracks, you can tell that these are not, in fact, lullabies for actual babies. But what's interesting is to see how the contributors' processes were around creating these lullabies. Some of these parents had more time and could dedicate more of themselves and their thoughts around creating the lullabies, whereas other parents very much had to do this last minute rush job to get the lullaby done, which is a commentary on how parents function in society and how much time we may or may not have.
Thank you so much, Christine, for actually bringing us into your practice that is now not only interdisciplinary and intersectional, but intergenerational. I think we're going to end actually on another body of work involving performance, but also involving a very special group of collaborators, your interpreters. So let's see. So this is a drawing that you've made about the multiple screens that your interpreters have to function within. But I'm wondering if you could talk about ASL interpretation, and then Chloe, let's go to the next slide. Also, then your very public performance of the Star Spangled Banner in ASL, and then how you've created different series of work out of your your featured performance at the Super Bowl. So why don't we go to the last slide, Chloe, as well? And Chloe, if Christine, you'd like to speak to, collaboration, your interpreters, and making work out of making performance work, I guess, out of well, if you want to explain what happened at the Super Bowl and the frustrating experience that happened, maybe that was both also a very public public launch pad for you as an artist.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers to all of this, so I'll do my best to kind of capture some of that. So first of all, this is the NFL's Super Bowl, which for me is not necessarily an organization that I'm fully aligned with when it comes to our values and our ideas around social justice and more. So to be representing myself on their platform, I felt a little bit conflicted about, but it's also a huge platform. It's in fact so huge that it was almost impossible to say no because of how important visibility is. I wish visibility wasn't this tool that we still have to employ around getting our rights and our voices heard, but I spoke to some friends, some activist friends, deaf friends, and so I decided to accept the invitation because the invitation was offered to me from the National Association for the Deaf, who I love, who is also the oldest civil rights organization in the US. So they're the ones who asked me to perform the Star Spangled Banner in America the Beautiful. And I said yes. I spent months preparing this translation of the songs because I really wanted to do my research. And mind you, this was before ChatGPT, so I couldn't be like, what was Francis Scott Key's life like in 1776, right? Like I had to do the research myself. I wanted to give a performance that took you back to that time when these songs were written. And so I had a lot of friends give me feedback on my translation to get it to the place of where I want it to be. Now, the voice you hear now is Beth, the woman that you also see on the screen. The two of us flew to Miami for the Super Bowl. We were able to attend to the rehearsal where Demi Lovato and Yolanda Adams were also there. But those two singers just came in, sang maybe once or twice, and then left. And so it wasn't a rehearsal where we had time to work together to figure out how I could perform my translation in hearing time, or rather, how I could perform my translation and keep the same timing as the singers were singing, as we all know, because singers like to hold notes. How will I figure that out? Luckily, one of us on the team had recorded the rehearsals, and so Beth and I were able to use that recording the day before the game and figure out what we were going to do to ensure that I stayed in hearing time. We actually came up with the queuing system in a matter of a few hours. And so you can see here with my hand up in the air, when Beth did that hand up movement and then lowered it, that's how I knew the singer was in fact starting to sing. And then the line for from C to shining C, Beth indicated C1, C2, or left C, right C, using my translation that she also had to memorize. Or like in the home of the brave, the Adams held out that note. And so then it was me holding out that note in time with the singer. And it wasn't until I saw Beth's hand come down, which felt like longer than I would have expected. When that hand came down from Beth, I then knew I could stop signing brave, aka stop holding that note. This was a political decision for me as a deaf person to perform my translation, my interpretation of the song in hearing time, and to stay in time with the singers. There was supposed to be a dedicated ASL feed to my performance, but apparently the camera person must have not gotten the memo and panned away to the audience, the viewers, the players, and lost deaf viewers access to my performance. Now, I didn't actually make this video piece until 2 years later because the Super Bowl was in 2020 and then there was a pandemic quickly thereafter, you might remember. And so it wasn't until 2022 where Beth and I found ourselves both in LA and were able to create this film piece. So I also added the teleprompter feature to this piece, and the text that you see in the teleprompter lines are my translation, where I borrowed English to notate in written form my translation that I was performing in sign language, which is why you don't see maybe proper English sentences in the teleprompter. And I chose the teleprompter feature because that kind of controls timing. People have to speak in time with the words as they come up, and it's on TV. Well, because the Super Bowl's on TV, right? This is a football game. We're all watching TV on Sundays if you're a football fan. And in the end, my gallery liaison, who had been willing to pay the NFL for whatever rate they wanted to charge for the full tape of my performance, but they didn't actually save it. They didn't record it. There is no documentation of that ASL feed from that day. My performance is gone. So unless somebody filmed my performance from their phone of the TV ASL feed that wasn't even my entire performance, there is no documentation of my performance, which adds another layer of erasure to me, my identity, my life, my history, the deaf community's life and history.
I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. I was on mute. So thank you so much, Christine, for that uh, experiential guide through the Super Bowl, through your collaboration with Beth, and through making a new work. Um, Chloe, I think, is it time to go to the audience and see if they have a question or two?
Oh, you're muted again, perhaps? Like, I don't hear anything on my
Hi,
phone.
hi everyone. Christine and Christina, that was so wonderful. Thank you so much for your conversation today. I have a few audience questions. If there's time for those still, Christine, we'd love to ask a couple of questions.
I'm looking at my team here because I have my schedule for the day, and
Maybe one question. I don't know.
Okay.
Or I don't know. It's Christine's choice. I know she also has a poem she wants to read
Yeah.
or be read.
oh, we have if you go to Instagram. Oh, she said she'll take it. The video piece.
Okay. Let's do two questions and then we can decide if we'll do the reading or not. If you have to go, Christine, we can conclude after the questions. Okay. The first question is from Monica. Monica says, "Thank you, Christine, for the exhibition. I saw it yesterday and I count it among the most mind-expanding exhibitions. I appreciated it a lot, including your sense of humor, like your description of Judy Chicago's dinner party, followed by the description of your grandma's dinner table. I have many questions, but I'm wondering if you write poetry and if you consider your art poetry."
So I used to write really bad poetry and I erased it. But I mean, I have thought about this. I don't feel like I'm good with words. Okay, I might be good with like words as art on a drawing, but to be poetic in my word choices as a person doesn't feel like that's my truth. I have asked myself, like, gee, Christine, I wonder if from birth you had had full access to American Sign Language, so acquired language early and fully, like most people get to have that privilege. Would I be a really good poet? I kind of feel like I could be, but we'll never know. And I also decided to be a visual artist, and that's perfectly fine with me. Now, poetry in American Sign Language is actually a very huge thing in the deaf community because we can do visual poetry. And so that's really a beautiful art form of deaf culture. But written poetry, I don't know if that's necessarily my thing. And would I return to it? I'm not sure. But yeah, I do feel like my art is poetic, but it also depends on your interpretation of poetic and poetry and how you're using those words.
Thank you for that answer, Christine, and thank you for that question, Monica. Charlie has a question about color. Can you talk a little bit about your use of black and white and your use of color and when you decide?
Okay, this is a good question. So in the beginning of my career, I did play around with some color, red, blue, for example. I liked blue because it made me think about the different like natural features of it, like breath, water, and it felt like blue was a good color choice, but ultimately it felt too connected to other meanings and not enough of a neutral palette for me to play with. I landed on black and white, and I did that intentionally because I feel like it conveys any idea I want to convey clearly. It also has the highest contrast. There's no gray area, there's no ambivalence. It allows the viewers to engage with the idea solely instead of asking themselves, did the artist choose green for X reason or choose blue for Y reason? No, they're just looking at the concept. If you look in my catalog, you can see that I've maybe allowed color to come back a little bit at this point. There's this one piece, it's a drawing titled Echo Trap, and there's some green. I don't feel like it was as successful as I would like it to be, but I do get complaints from my daughter saying that I don't use enough color. And so she's got a valid point there. And so I'm going to try to work on it.
That's really sweet. The next question and last one is about humor. An audience member is wondering how you developed the humor in your work. And I saw you talk about this last night at your lecture at the Whitney, but we'd love to hear for this audience today as well.
Yeah, as I said last night, I was not funny as a kid. And it wasn't until I left my deaf bubble, my deaf community, and hung out with people from the quote unquote outside world, the hearing world. Because what I was seeing is that humor was the most efficient, effective way to get what I needed. Because if I was serious and making demands for my needs, people weren't really receiving it. But using humor allowed people to kind of relax and become more willing to help me because I wasn't taking things so seriously. So then humor started to really become part of my practice, part of my art, and even part of my identity. Like yesterday, I felt a little bit like a stand-up comedian, right? Like I almost felt like, ooh, I got to take it easy on, on using all this humor. And I'm getting some facial responses from Jenny here in the room, but I feel like maybe I'm overusing humor right now. It might be time for me to pull the e-brake or hit the brakes and pull a Yui and go in the opposite direction. I don't know. We'll see. But humor for me has always been a really good tool as a way to share really serious things such as my anger, my sadness with audiences and allow them to stay in the room with me or to allow them to feel like they can stay in the room with me and not scare them off, so to say.
Thank you, Christine, so much. That's going to conclude today's Q&A. And I know you found a poem for me to share, so I'm going to share screen with the poem. So let me pull that up for us.
And I'd love to set it up a little bit and talk about
Yeah,
it.
please.
My friend Shira Grableski, forgive Beth if she's not saying it right, but she believes it's Grableski. So Shira and I have been friends for a very long time. She is actually now based in New York, and she is a fierce advocate and is also getting her PhD. She comes from a background of being a teacher, but also a poet and a beautiful poet at that. So I asked her to send me a 1 minute clip of a longer poem that she has created. And the poem is essentially saying that deaf people shouldn't just be data points for others. Oh, you can see that it says, I have not translated this into printed English. Exactly. And the title is Data Points. And that's it.
Thank you so much for sharing that poem with us, Christine. That was such a beautiful way to conclude today. And I want to thank you and Christina so much again for this conversation, as well as Emma, Megan, Jenny, and the Whitney team who were so supportive in preparation for today. I would also, of course, like to thank Denise and Beth for their interpretation today. And I'd like to thank the Terra Foundation for American Art who make this program possible. And if you're free on Monday at 1 p.m., join us for a conversation with Kylie Manning and Gabby Collins Fernandez on the occasion of Kylie's show, There's Something That Stays at Pace Gallery. And as is a rail tradition, I'm going to unspotlight all of us so that Christine can see everyone. And I invite everyone to turn on your cameras and wave to Christine goodbye as you leave. Thank you so, so much for being here today and for joining us for this conversation.
Thank you so much for coming, everyone. And also, thank you to the Brooklyn Rail team. Thank you, Christina. Thank you, Chloe. Just everyone who got involved today. So thank you for platforming this interview. I hope this isn't the last, so I look forward to the next one.
We can't wait. Thank you so much, Christine and Christina. Bye, everybody.
Bye, Christine. Thank you. Thank you. Hugs, kisses.